Nelson Mutz is the loud and annoying kid who is sometimes friends with Bart and Lisa but is usually their enemy. Nelson lives in a rough part of town with a mom who doesn't seem to care about him much. No surprise, he ended up being such a bad kid. His father abandoned him and his mom at an early age, saying he was going to buy cigarettes before never returning. That must have hurt him deeply because since then, Nelson has been a real pain in the neck to many students in Springfield. Like his bullying buddies, Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearny, Nelson has dealt his fair share of physical and emotional pain to plenty of kids in Springfield. Bart, Milhouse, and Martin Prince have all been victims of his fists. He can be cruel, but sometimes Nelson beats up people for good reasons, like when he got a hold of Bart for wasting Mrs. Crabapple's time, or pretending to be Krusty the Clown's assistant. Usually, though, he's just mean for the sake of being mean. Nelson is known for his signature laugh, and many characters have heard him yell, "Ha-ha!" after their mistakes and misfortunes. He seems to always be there when people face hard times, and usually he's responsible for it. He's definitely a villain, but Nelson has shown some moments of kindness and humanity. Over the years, he has provided some softness for characters, like Marge, Martin, and Lisa. In fact, Nelson once dated Lisa, but only for a short time. He has also stood up for Martin occasionally, and begrudgingly. Plus, Nelson is a devoted fan of Snow White, if you can believe it, even though he would beat you up for revealing that. Nelson is a complicated character. He's definitely a bad guy, and one of the most well-known villains on The Simpsons. But he's also, secretly, a bit of a softie. Fat Tony is a gangster in the mafia that has repeatedly broken the law. From illegal gambling to cigarette smuggling to bootlegging, he's been at the center of it all. Technically, he's at the head of the D'Amico crime family in Springfield, and is the boss of numerous gangsters, including his lackeys, Joey, Legs, and Louie. Tony's life and his rise to crime have been revealed over the years, and now we know a bit more about where he came from. As a kid, Fat Tony wanted to be an organ grinder, pizza man, or leaning tower maker, but eventually became a member of the mob, working his way up from henchman to boss. As a younger gangster, Tony seemed to have it all. He had a wife, Anna Maria, and a young son, Michael. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, his wife ended up taking a bullet for Tony during an attempted assassination, leaving him a widower, raising Michael on his own. Despite the tough demeanor and threats of violence, Tony has been known to leave flowers on his late wife's grave every weekend. In the years that followed, Fat Tony would have his hand in a number of major crimes throughout the city. His biggest draw was gambling, and there have been multiple instances of him hounding people for the money they owe him, such as known gambler Krusty the Clown. Although he's obviously dangerous, Tony also seems like a gentle guy at times. There have been many occasions when his ominous statements have been misconstrued. Homer in particular has seen a softer side of Tony. Homer even worked for Fat Tony, but was secretly in cahoots with the FBI at the same time. When Tony found out that he had been betrayed by Homer, he had a sudden heart attack and, sadly, passed away. But that wasn't the end of the road for Springfield's most famous mobster. His cousin, the slender, fit Tony, came to take over the crime operation and also became friendly with Homer. But the stress of running Springfield's criminal underworld led Fit Tony, who sounded just like his cousin, to overeat and eventually gain a bunch of weight, eventually earning the nickname Fit Fat Tony, and then just Fat Tony. He may have been a different Fat Tony, but in nearly every conceivable way, he's the same guy. Like many others on our list, Tony is definitely a bad guy who has done some villainous things, but it's not as simple as that, and there are some redeemable qualities about him. Snake, a.k.a. the Serpent, a.k.a. the biggest jailbird in all of Springfield, is bad news. He's been arrested countless times on the show, but rarely stays locked up for long. He speaks with an intimidating Valley Boy accent and walks around in a cut-off vest, denim jeans, and with a pack of cigarettes rolled up under his sleeve. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have goals. Snake just wants to commit crimes. Snake has been a bad boy since youth, earning the nickname of Detention Bird from a young Clancy Wiggum back when they were just 16 years old. He spent time at a juvenile facility for troubled youth, but he also went to school and Middlebury College. In fact, there was a time when Snake was set to become an archaeologist, until Mo the bartender stole cold coins that Snake had discovered and set him down a path of revenge. He rides around town in a 1969 Dodge Charger called the Lil Bandit. but has also stolen countless cars, including those belonging to Dr. Nick, Professor Frink, Chief Wiggum, and many more. He's also robbed the Quickie Mart more times than you can count, and through it all, he's shown no remorse and desire to change. Okay, Snake isn't all bad news. He has a son named Jeremy who looks and sounds a lot like his father, and, based on what we've seen, he's a pretty good dad. It's also been suggested that he has a soft spot for animals, especially puppies. But, despite all of that, Snake is a fairly bad dude, and it doesn't look like anything is going to change that. His love of robbing stores, stealing cars, and outrunning Springfield PD is just too much, and no one can convince him to go down the right path in life. Charles Montgomery Burns, best known as Homer's boss, Mr. Burns, is the richest, oldest, and most menacing character on The Simpsons, and has shown his wicked intentions multiple times. It's not entirely clear how much money Mr. Burns has, and it's also never been stated when he was born, but he's been wreaking havoc in Springfield for generations. He was born in the early 20th century, and once mentioned surviving the sinking of the Titanic. Flashbacks show that Burns grew up in a relatively poor environment, and didn't have many people to rely on aside from his beloved teddy bear, Bobo. Believe it or not, he seemed like a relatively nice kid, and no one would ever suspect that he would become the awful man he is today. In fact, his parents' nickname for young Monty was actually Happy. Maybe it was the loss of Bobo, or perhaps it was the fact that he left his family as a kid. But something changed in Mr. Burns as a young man, and he soon became twisted and cruel. In the early 1920s, Burns found success in the business world and started to accumulate his millions. As he made more money, he became more evil, and it wasn't long before he was a ruthless and heartless tycoon. After spending years in college, and then as a soldier overseas, Burns came to Springfield to continue doing business. Years later, he would open the Springfield nuclear power plant, employing hundreds of workers, including Homer, but constantly doing all he could to undercut and underpay them. Over the years, Burns has committed many heinous crimes, including stealing the Simpsons family dog, selling plutonium to third-world countries for vacation money, exploiting child labor laws, and even kidnapping singer Tom Jones. He also infamously blocked out the sun as a way for his plant to make more money. Burns is definitely an evil guy, but what makes him even worse is the fact that he takes joy in being so bad. Any instances of remorse are brief and fleeting, and Burns takes great satisfaction in hurting the people of Springfield while lining his pocketbook with more cash. Kang and Kodos are a pair of aliens from outer space who have appeared on the show numerous times, and have hoped to either enslave or end humanity. They look pretty much the exact same, although you can tell them apart because Kang's voice is just a little bit deeper. They're slimy, gross aliens, with multiple tentacles, sharp teeth, and breathing helmets. Yeah, they're pretty menacing. We first met Kang and Kodos all the way smack in one of the first Halloween-themed Treehouse of Horror episodes, when they appeared in a segment called Hungry Are the Damned. In it, the two aliens attempted to impress the Simpsons by providing them with delicious meals after abducting them. After Lisa became suspicious of these two, she accused them of trying to fatten her family up so that they could eat them. In reality, Kang and Kodos really were just trying to treat the Simpsons well, and both were terribly offended by Lisa's accusation. With tears in their eyes, they went back home to their home planet of Rigel 7. That was the last time Kang and Kodos were good to the Simpsons or the people of Springfield. Over the years, they have tried to invade Earth multiple times, but have rarely had great success. They have appeared in every single Treehouse of Horror episode so far, sometimes as main characters, and often only as cameos. In each appearance, they have had grand plans to enslave humanity, but they consistently come up short or lose interest. Kang and Kodos have rarely had success with their plans for world domination, but it hasn't stopped them from trying. Of all the bad guys on this list, they might be the worst because they want to not only make life hard for the Simpsons, but literally take over the world. Luckily for the people of Springfield, they don't seem to know what they're doing. Dr. Robert Onderdonk Bob Terwilliger Jr., best known as Sideshow Bob, started out as a successful sidekick to Krusty the Clown, providing comedy to the children of Springfield. However, he grew tired of constantly being made fun of and shot out of cannons and hit in the face with pies. Bob soon became disgruntled against Krusty and wanted to get revenge. In his first act of crime, Bob framed Krusty for the armed robbery of the Quickie Mart. Krusty was then arrested, and Bob took over the popular show and changed it in some huge ways. But that didn't last for long when Bart exposed Bob's evil plot, ending his career and freeing Krusty. As he was sent to jail, Sideshow Bob vowed to get his revenge against Bart. That was just the beginning of his decades-long hatred for Bart. After several years in prison, he started dating Bart's aunt, Selma. He proposed to her, and they were set to be married, despite Bart saying it was a huge mistake. Sure enough, it was, and it turned out that Bob was only with Selma because he was trying to embezzle the money she made from the stock market. His plans were foiled again by Bart. Bob spent more time in prison, but he immediately tried to put an end to Bart after his release. After that plan also failed, he attempted to become mayor of Springfield with his sights set on bringing down Bart. He won the election, but once again, Bart was able to put an end to Bob's scheme when he and Lisa discovered the election was rigged. In the 3 years since that, Bob has repeatedly come in and out of Bart's life, always trying to kill him with multiple complicated plots. There have been times of brief innocence. However, they don't last for long, and Bob's hatred for Bart and his plans to end his life are stronger than ever before. If there is one constant thing we can always rely on for The Simpsons, it's that Sideshow Bob will always detest Bart Simpson, and never stop trying to eliminate him. Patty and Selma. Patty and Selma are definitely a pair of villains for Homer. For years now, they've made his life miserable, and have never missed an opportunity to embarrass him. Patty and Selma are identical twins and the sisters of Marge. Even though they frequently critique her and her life choices, especially those related to Homer, Marge still loves them and stands up for them. It leads to a complicated family dynamic, that's for sure. Patty and Selma were tough older sisters to Marge when they were young and made fun of her often, especially her desire to someday become an astronaut. As if that wasn't bad enough, they also made Marge do their chores for them. As adults, they obviously love their younger sister, but they never hold back from telling her she could have things so much better if she wasn't with Homer. In fact, sometimes it feels like that is all they talk about. Like most twins, it's difficult to tell Patty and Selma apart, but always remember that Patty is the one with the afro haircut who seems to be a bit more cynical than Selma, who is slightly more optimistic and luckier in love. Since they're identical, it's not surprising that Patty and Selma are the same in numerous ways. For starters, they work together at the DMV. They both love the action show MacGyver, and they both truly loathe Homer. They wish that Marge would have married her high school boyfriend, Artie Ziff, who went on to be very successful. Again and again, they've celebrated and pointed out any mistakes that Homer made, and celebrated his hardships. They didn't even care when Homer suffered a heart attack and had a voodoo doll that looked just like him. There have been some moments of kindness between Patty, Selma, and Homer, but they aren't often, and it's clear that it'll never change. They all tolerate one another because of their shared love for Marge, but will always butt heads with one another. These two give all in-laws a bad name. Frank Grimes was an employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant and immediately took a strong dislike to Homer, who he found to be really lazy, stupid, and downright idiotic. Frank was by the book, a diligent employee with a crew-cut haircut, strong work ethic, and a lacking sense of humor. He worked hard and he expected everyone else to work hard too. Obviously, he and Homer were polar opposites. Even though Grimes hated Homer, Homer liked him. He even gave him a lovable nickname, Grimy. However, that didn't matter, and things went from bad to worse between Homer and Grimes when Homer made a mistake involving spilled acid, and Grimes swore that they'd be enemies forever. Homer tried to make things right and even invited Frank to his home, serving him a nice dinner and introducing him to the family. That backfired and only made Frank more upset, because he couldn't understand how someone so stupid could have such a pleasant life. He said that Homer was being rewarded for being a lazy and ignorant person, and only despised him more. Following that, Grimes turned to his villainous plans, intent on exposing Homer and costing him his job. He wanted to embarrass Homer, but nothing seemed to work. He submitted Homer into a power plant model building contest that was being held for kids, but Homer ended up winning, which set Frank off in a huge way. Furious with rage at Homer, Grimes paraded around the plant, mocking and mimicking Homer and how incompetent he was. Nearly hysterical with his anger, Frank pretended to be Homer and grabbed some high-voltage power cables, claiming that he wouldn't get electrocuted because nothing bad ever happens to Homer. Well, something bad happened to Frank, and he was instantly killed. That wasn't the last we heard from Grimes, however. Sometime later, Homer was targeted with attempts on his life, and it was revealed that Frank's son, Frank Grimes Jr., was attempting to get his revenge. But he ended up being caught and was arrested. Hank Scorpio is the evil but charming owner of Globex Corporation, a mega business in the pristine city of Cypress Creek, and, for a short while, Homer's new boss. When Homer suddenly gets a new job working for Globex, he's introduced to Scorpio, the loud, gruff, but very friendly millionaire, who instantly takes a liking to Homer and his family. Homer also loves Hank's attitude and the way he runs his company, but it soon becomes apparent that Scorpio is a CEO by day, terrorist by night. Scorpio might be fond of Homer and the rest of the Simpsons clan, but he has a strong dislike of the American government. Throughout the episode, Scorpio threatens the United States, reveals plans to take over the East Coast, and even kidnaps and threatens a secret agent trying to stop him. Homer and his family are completely oblivious to everything Hank is doing, and soon fall in love with their new city. But Marge and the kids soon miss Springfield, leading to Homer sadly having to give up his job. When he walks into Hank's office to say his goodbyes, Globex and the U.S. government are battling each other, and Hank is wielding a flamethrower and laughing maniacally. We never saw Scorpio after the Simpsons returned to Springfield, but he does send a letter gifting the Denver Broncos to Homer and inviting him to visit if he ever finds himself on the East Coast. Was Hank Scorpio a bad guy? Well, of course he was. However, no one can deny that he treated Homer very well and legitimately liked him, despite his evil intentions to take over the world. Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearny have consistently picked on Bart since the start of the show. Few people have caused him as much pain as these schoolyard bullies. They almost always work as a trio, but it's somewhat hard to tell them apart. But Jimbo is the tall, skinny one with the beanie, Dolph is the shorter one who's typically hunched over, and Kearny is the pudgy one with the shaved head. We don't know much about their home lives, although we have seen that Jimbo's parents don't get along well and he has a sister and a brother. Dolph plays hockey and Kearny actually has children of his own. Since the start of The Simpsons, these three bullies have wreaked havoc on Bart and his friends, especially Milhouse. They're all a few years older than Bart and are apparently in 5th grade. We also know that they're close to Nelson Mutz, another bully who treats Bart poorly, but it's not just Bart who gets knocked around by Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearny. They have popped up in numerous episodes, making fun of other students, adults, and more. From giving wedgies and pink bellies to shoplifting and making fun of other people, these bullies have been a menace to Springfield for years. There have been some moments when Jimbo, Dolph, and Kearny have been sympathetic and even nice to Bart, but it's not common. Baby Gerald, sometimes called the monobrow or unibrow baby, is a bad little boy who has repeatedly shown signs of being an up-and-coming evildoer. He's Maggie Simpson's arch-nemesis. Known for his large black unibrow, wide nose, overbite, and 2 buck teeth, Gerald is a baby whose face you won't soon forget. But it's not just his features that make him so memorable. Gerald has also a certain energy and attitude, suggests he's always up to no good. As luck would have it, both Gerald and Maggie have the same birthday. But since Springfield Hospital is always run terribly, there was just one diaper remaining, and it was given to Maggie instead of Gerald. Because of that, Gerald was in newspapers instead, which led him to having a terrible rash that never went away. Since that fateful day, Gerald has been holding Maggie responsible for everything bad that has happened in his young life. Every time they see one another, Maggie and Gerald give each other hostile glares. Typically, this just ends at dirty looks. However, the two babies were once spotted fighting in public on St. Patrick's Day. Like many villains, Gerald knows how to hide his devilish side when he has to. When Gerald is with Maggie, he seems to be a well-behaved child, showing very little signs of mischief. But when the adults have turned away, his true nature is shown, and it's clear that he's up to no good. Surprisingly, they might not always be mortal enemies. According to a flashback episode, Maggie and Gerald will become friends in the future, tie the knot, and even have a child of their own. That means that baby Gerald may be a major villain now, but could someday become part of the Simpsons family. Rex Banner is a United States Treasury officer who is clean-cut, no-nonsense, and completely by the book. When Springfield passes a new prohibition law, Banner comes to town to ensure that no one is drinking alcohol. As you can imagine, that put him in direct opposition to Homer, who will find any way to keep enjoying beer. During Prohibition, Homer creates his own home-crafted brand of beer and earns the nickname the Beer Baron. Although his identity isn't known, he quickly becomes public enemy number 1 for Banner, who will stop at nothing to apprehend him. Banner seems like a top-of-the-line investigator, but he actually does a fairly poor job of figuring out who the Beer Baron is. There were plenty of clues, and Homer didn't do a great job of covering his tracks, but Banner repeatedly missed his chances of solving the case. And there's even some evidence that he himself breaks the law, because he turned a blind eye to Fat Tony smuggling drugs into town since he was solely focused on shutting down alcohol distribution in the city. He may have mostly been trying to uphold the law, but Banner rubbed a lot of people the wrong way during his time in Springfield, namely Chief Wiggums, because he fired him from his job right away. As more and more people grew lukewarm on the idea of prohibition, Banner overstayed his welcome. It was eventually Chief Wiggum who would eventually turn Homer in as the beer baron, leading to Banner's prompt firing. To make matters even worse, Banner's punishment was being slung out of town via a catapult, quickly ending his brief attempt to try to police the people of Springfield. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and comment down below which villain from The Simpsons is your favorite. See you next time.